I cannot believe I am agreeing to marry someone I do not even know. Jack Miller whispered to himself as he stared at the polished mahogany doors of Eleanor Brooks' penthouse. The words still rang in his ears, surreal and heavy, like they did not belong to his own life. Just hours ago, he had been pacing the small studio apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister, counting the bills he could not pay and the tuition he could not cover. Now he stood in a luxury skyscraper in downtown Chicago, rain glistening on the streets far below, as the chauffeur opened the door to Eleanor Brooks' world of wealth, a world so distant from his own that every detail seemed almost unreal. Eleanor, 71 years old and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that mirrored her commanding presence, waited for him in the foyer with the poise of someone who had lived in power for decades. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her piercing blue eyes studied him with a mixture of expectation and subtle amusement. The contract marriage was meant to be simple, straightforward, and without emotion, a mutual arrangement designed to secure her legacy and provide him with financial relief. Eleanor had made it clear. There would be no love, no affection, only companionship in the eyes of society and the signing of documents that bound them together for appearances. Jack, 23 years old, with a weary face etched from sleepless nights, part-time jobs, and the burden of a father's debts, felt the weight of every dollar and every decision pressing down on him. His backpack, once slung carelessly over one shoulder during his walks across the college campus, now felt out of place, as if it belonged to another life. The grand chandelier above reflected fragments of his anxiety in the polished marble floor, and every echo of his footsteps seemed amplified in the cavernous space. Eleanor gestured toward the formal seating area, her hands steady and deliberate, and he followed with a hesitant step, every movement measured, aware of how small he felt in a world so unlike his own. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the faint hum of the heating system and the subtle sound of city traffic far below. Eleanor began explaining the terms once more, the arrangement, the expectations, the boundaries that could not be crossed, her voice calm and authoritative, leaving Jack only the choice to accept or walk away. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Jack forced a deep breath, trying to reconcile the images of his family struggling at home with the cold reality of the contract laid before him. He wondered what kind of life would unfold in the following days. In a mansion filled with servants who moved like shadows and rooms so vast they seemed designed to dwarf any human presence. Eleanor continued, placing a delicate porcelain cup of tea on the side table, her gaze unwavering, as if to silently remind him that the decision was final the moment he took a step further into her world. Jack sat, his hands clenched lightly in his lap, feeling the unfamiliar weight of opulence pressing against the memories of worn textbooks, overdue rent notices, and shared meals with his sister. The first moments of this union, however artificial, carried with them a tension that neither could ignore, the unspoken understanding that this was a marriage of convenience. Yet already, beneath the surface, curiosity, apprehension, and the first faint stirrings of a connection began to take hold, hinting that the next 7 days would challenge both of them in ways neither had imagined. The first morning after the wedding was a quiet one, but it carried a weight that pressed on Jack Miller like the thick Chicago humidity in late summer. He awoke in the guest suite, a room more vast than his entire apartment back home, with walls adorned by oil paintings of landscapes he had never seen and furniture so pristine it seemed fragile to the touch. The bed beneath him was enormous, draped in silk sheets that reflected the early morning sunlight filtering through floor to ceiling windows. He swung his legs over the edge, the polished hardwood cold against his bare feet, and felt the reality of the previous day sink in deeper. Eleanor Brooks had already left for her morning engagements, leaving behind only a neatly folded note on the mahogany desk instructing him on the breakfast arrangements and a reminder about the terms of their agreement. The note was crisp, formal, and carried her signature flourish, a small but pointed reminder that despite sharing a last name now, he was still very much a guest in her meticulously ordered world. Jack poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, thinking of the thousands of dollars he would never have imagined seeing in his life, stacked neatly in envelopes labeled for bills he did not have to pay, yet feeling the hollowness that came from knowing none of it had come freely. He had accepted the marriage out of necessity, out of a desperation that had gnawed at his conscience since his father had passed, leaving debts that seemed impossible to repay. The thought of his mother, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months because of this decision, brought a small, conflicted warmth to his chest, but was immediately tempered by the strange coldness that accompanied living under the gaze of someone so powerful. Jack dressed in the simple clothes Eleanor had provided, a suit that fit him like a glove, but carried no scent, no character, no history, and stepped out into the hallways, each echo of his steps magnified by the high ceilings and vastness of the rooms. He moved cautiously, aware of the staff who observed silently from behind the doors of the suites and from the kitchen, where meals were prepared by chefs he had never met. As he descended to the grand dining area, the sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating the intricate mosaic of the floor, casting geometric shadows that reminded him starkly of the separation between his life and Eleanor's world. Breakfast was laid out with a precision that was almost intimidating. Eggs perfectly shaped, fruits arranged in color gradients, coffee steaming in porcelain cups that seemed delicate enough to break at the slightest touch. Jack sat alone at the long table, his hands wrapped around the cup as if holding on to some small comfort, wondering how he was to navigate these next 7 days and beyond without misstepping, without revealing too much of his own insecurity. The silence was broken only by the faint clinking of silverware from distant corners and the distant hum of the city waking below, and Jack found himself lost in thought, replaying the brief but intense conversation from the night before, Eleanor's clear and deliberate instructions echoing in his mind. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. As he finished his breakfast and left the dining area, Jack took a slow walk through the expansive gardens visible from the veranda, the carefully manicured hedges and flowering plants a silent reminder of the order and wealth that governed Eleanor Brooks' life. The scent of fresh, cut grass mingled with the distant aroma of baked pastries from the kitchen, grounding him in the moment even as his mind raced with questions. How would these 7 days unfold? Would he be able to maintain his dignity in this alien environment? And more importantly, would he survive the subtle tests of etiquette and expectation set before him by a woman who had lived 71 years mastering every nuance of control and influence? Each step he took echoed in the marble walkways, mirroring the echo of his own uncertainty, and yet beneath the trepidation, there was a flicker of curiosity, a sense that in this house of extraordinary wealth, extraordinary events were waiting to unfold, and that each decision, each gesture, would carry consequences far beyond what he could currently imagine. Jack Miller spent the rest of the morning walking through the rooms of the mansion, each space meticulously decorated, with ceilings so high they made his own small apartment feel like a distant memory. He found himself in the library, a vast room filled with books that smelled of leather and old paper, sunlight streaming in through arched windows and reflecting off the polished hardwood floors. Each bookcase towered above him, and he realized that he could spend entire days wandering these halls without even touching half of what was contained within. As he ran his fingers along the spines, he felt a strange mixture of awe and alienation. Eleanor Brooks had left him alone to adjust, perhaps testing his composure or giving him the space to feel the weight of his decision. He sat at a small desk near the window, the wind outside stirring the leaves of the towering oak trees on the grounds, and he tried to focus on anything other than the reality that he was now legally married to a woman more than 40 years his senior. Thoughts of his mother and sister back home, who had finally slept without worrying about bills or tuition, filled him with a bittersweet relief. But there was also a gnawing unease that he could not shake. Jack had always been resourceful, But the vastness of Eleanor's life, the staff who moved quietly through the halls, the schedule she kept, and the authority she wielded with a simple glance, all reminded him that he was a stranger in this world. He decided to explore the mansion further, walking past the dining hall where breakfast had been laid out earlier, through a hallway lined with portraits of Eleanor's ancestors, each gaze following him as if silently measuring him against the legacy he had just married into. In one corner, a small music room caught his attention, the piano polished to a reflective shine, and he pressed a key lightly, the note echoing softly and filling the otherwise silent hallway. For a brief moment, he imagined himself here not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged, and the thought both frightened and tempted him. The telephone on the desk rang, a reminder of the outside world he had temporarily left behind, and when he picked it up, it was his mother, her voice tinged with worry and hope. Jack assured her that everything was going as it should, careful not to reveal the mixture of emotions that churned inside him. After the call, he wandered into the solarium, a glass-enclosed room that overlooked the gardens, where light fell in golden rectangles across the marble floor. The contrast between the life he had left behind and this new environment was staggering, and he felt both gratitude and guilt coiling together. The enormity of his circumstances made him realize that the next 7 days would not be simply about following the terms of the contract. They would be a test of character, patience, and adaptability. He caught sight of a small journal lying on a side table, its leather cover embossed with initials that he assumed belonged to Eleanor. Curiosity nudged him to open it, and inside were carefully penned notes, plans, and reflections, offering a glimpse into a woman who had lived long, structured, and intensely, someone whose world he had entered suddenly and completely. Jack understood that navigating this life would require more than obedience. It would require perception, sensitivity, and a careful reading of Eleanor herself. Every step, every word, and every gesture might carry consequences he could not yet foresee. As he moved through the rooms, feeling both overwhelmed and slightly exhilarated, he thought about how drastically his own life had changed within a single day. He was no longer merely a student worrying about tuition. He was a husband, albeit one in a very unconventional arrangement, and the mansion around him was a daily reminder that every choice in the coming days would shape not only his own future, but that of his family and the woman he had married. Jack paused in the center of the solarium, letting the sun warm his face, and realized that adapting to this world would be a challenge unlike any he had faced before. Yet it was a challenge he could not afford to shy away from, because the stakes extended far beyond himself. Jack Miller spent the afternoon navigating the enormous mansion, each corridor and room presenting its own challenge to his sense of direction and personal comfort. He had begun to memorize the sounds of the staff moving quietly in the background, the soft click of the kitchen doors, the distant hum of the elevators, and the measured footsteps of Eleanor Brooks as she conducted her affairs with impeccable precision. In the solarium, sunlight had shifted, illuminating the delicate arrangement of potted orchids and casting elongated shadows across the marble floor. And Jack paused to take in a view, noticing how meticulously every detail had been considered to reflect order, wealth, and control. He wandered into a sitting room where velvet drapes hung heavily from tall windows, the furniture arranged in symmetrical perfection that reminded him of an art gallery more than a living space. He took a seat in a high-backed chair, the leather cool beneath his hands, and let his mind wander back to the life he had left behind in his small apartment, to the worry lines on his mother's face and the exhausted sighs of his sister as she struggled to finish her homework late into the night. He realized that this contract marriage was more than just a transaction. It was a lifeline that had rescued his family from financial despair, and yet it came at the cost of entering a world that he did not fully understand, a world where the rules were invisible until broken and where each gesture, each word, could carry unforeseen weight. While Jack was lost in thought, a small sound drew his attention to the corner of the room where a table had been neatly set with afternoon tea, porcelain cups filled with steaming chamomile, and small plates of fresh pastries. He wondered if Eleanor had arranged this for him, a subtle test of how he would conduct himself in her presence, or a simple courtesy to ease the awkwardness of their unusual arrangement. He sipped the tea, noticing the delicate sweetness and the quiet solitude of the moment. And for the first time since stepping into the penthouse, he felt a tentative sense of belonging, however fragile and fleeting it might be. Later, he wandered through the gardens visible from the veranda, each flower bed trimmed with geometric precision, each pathway lined with gravel so finely raked that it reflected a deliberate attention to detail, and Jack could not help but feel the contrast between the life he had left behind, full of chaos and struggle, and this meticulously curated world of Eleanor Brooks. As he followed a winding path, he came upon a small fountain, the water trickling steadily over polished stone, and he found himself thinking about the fleeting nature of wealth and control, and how quickly circumstances could change a life. His contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door behind him, and when he turned, it was the housekeeper, a woman whose movements were quiet and practiced, carrying a tray with a letter from Eleanor. Jack took the letter with cautious hands, unfolding it to find carefully written instructions and an invitation to join Eleanor for a private dinner that evening. A dinner intended to discuss the arrangement further and perhaps gauge his adjustment to the mansion's rhythm. He read the words slowly, noting the precision and formality, and felt a mixture of apprehension and curiosity about the upcoming meeting. The rest of the afternoon was spent acclimating to the ambient sounds and spatial awareness of the mansion, cataloging small details that might be important later, and reflecting on how quickly his ordinary life had been replaced by one of such stark contrast. Jack understood that the days ahead would require careful observation, patience, and subtlety, and he resolved to move through them with respect, awareness, and cautious curiosity, realizing that the mansion itself, the staff, and Eleanor Brooks would all play roles in shaping how he would navigate the tenuous balance between obligation and opportunity, between survival and dignity, and between the life he had known and the life he had just entered. The evening approached with a golden glow spilling across the vast estate, painting the gardens in warm tones that softened the imposing architecture and brought a strange sense of intimacy to the mansion. Jack Miller walked along the veranda, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, feeling the weight of the day settle into his shoulders. The mansion that had seemed so alien in the morning now felt like a labyrinth of both opportunity and uncertainty. Each room he passed reminded him of Eleanor Brooks' meticulous nature, from the perfectly aligned vases to the way the drapes caught the fading light just so. As he reached the grand dining room, he paused, noticing that the table had been set for a private dinner, candles flickering gently and casting soft shadows across the polished silverware and crystal glasses. Jack wondered if Eleanor had chosen to dine with him to observe how he conducted himself, to test the waters of their unusual arrangement, or perhaps to impart some lesson he had yet to grasp. He took a deep breath, smoothing his suit jacket and running a hand through his hair, trying to quell the nervous energy that had built up all day. Eleanor entered the room quietly, her presence commanding yet unassuming, and Jack felt a flicker of anxiety mixed with curiosity. She gestured to the chair opposite her, and he sat, noting the elegance of her posture and the serene authority in her expression. Conversation began cautiously, with Eleanor asking about his adjustment to the mansion, the routines, and the staff. Jack replied honestly, careful to balance respect with subtle assertion of his own perspective, revealing a glimpse of the determination and intelligence that had carried him through years of struggle. Eleanor listened intently, nodding and occasionally smiling at small observations, her eyes bright with a mix of evaluation and amusement. The meal proceeded slowly, with courses served in delicate succession, each dish prepared to perfection and paired with beverages that Jack had never encountered. He focused on the flavors and textures, using the ritual of eating as a grounding exercise to maintain composure in this overwhelming environment. Between bites, Eleanor spoke of her life, her interests, and the responsibilities that accompanied her wealth and position, painting a portrait of a woman whose experience was vast and whose decisions were weighed carefully with foresight. Jack found himself intrigued not only by the stories, but by the subtle manner in which Eleanor conveyed authority and empathy, a balance he had never witnessed before. As dessert arrived, Jack noticed a small envelope placed beside his plate, sealed with Eleanor's initials. He opened it to find a handwritten note, an invitation to explore the mansion's art collection, and a hint that she wished to show him aspects of her life that few had seen. Jack felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension, aware that each interaction, each gesture, was layered with meaning, and that these next steps would shape his understanding of Eleanor and perhaps of himself. The sun had nearly set when they concluded the meal, the room now bathed in the soft, muted glow of candlelight and twilight. Jack stood, thanked Eleanor, and followed her through a hallway leading to the private gallery, noticing for the first time the portraits of Eleanor's ancestors and the rare artworks carefully displayed in niches along the walls. The evening promised both challenge and revelation, and as he stepped into the gallery, Jack understood that this night was not merely an introduction to Eleanor's world, but a subtle initiation into a life he had entered for necessity, now complicated by curiosity, respect, and the first sparks of unexpected connection. Jack Miller followed Eleanor Brooks through the grand gallery, each step echoing softly against the marble floor, the walls adorned with centuries-old paintings and intricate sculptures that spoke of wealth, history, and meticulous curation. Eleanor walked ahead with grace, her posture impeccable, yet she cast subtle glances over her shoulder, gauging Jack's reactions to each piece. Jack's eyes roamed over the collection, noticing the richness of color, the careful placement, and the stories embedded in each brushstroke, but he also felt a quiet tension in his chest. The gallery was beautiful, almost breathtaking, yet it was a stark reminder of the gulf between his world and Eleanor's. He admired the art, but he could not forget that he was here under an agreement, a marriage that had been forged out of necessity rather than choice. Eleanor stopped in front of a portrait of a young woman dressed in Victorian attire, her expression calm and confident, and she turned to Jack with a subtle smile. She asked him what he thought of the painting, and Jack hesitated, unsure whether his honest opinion would be acceptable or interpreted as ignorance. He finally replied that he found the woman's gaze striking, commanding attention even from centuries away, and Eleanor's smile deepened slightly, a rare warmth appearing in her eyes. They continued down the gallery, moving past landscapes, still lives, and portraits, Jack growing gradually more comfortable in Eleanor's presence, though he remained keenly aware of the formal nature of their relationship. As they approached a small alcove at the end of the gallery, Eleanor paused and gestured toward a large canvas depicting a family estate, remarkably similar in style to the mansion they inhabited. She explained that it was an ancestral home, long in her family, and she recounted stories of her childhood visits, the traditions maintained, and the responsibilities that came with inheriting such wealth. Jack listened intently, struck by the weight of expectation carried in her words, and he felt a growing respect for the life Eleanor had navigated. Despite the formalities, there was an undercurrent of trust beginning to form, subtle and cautious, as if each moment in the gallery was a test of his ability to observe, respond, and adapt. Eleanor finally stopped before a modestly framed painting that depicted a quiet lakeside scene, simpler than the grandeur surrounding it, and she asked Jack why it attracted him. Jack hesitated, then spoke of the calm it brought him, the sense of peace in contrast to the chaos of his previous life, and Eleanor nodded knowingly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It was the first moment he sensed a genuine connection, a small bridge forming across the vast differences in their lives. As the evening drew on, they left the gallery, and Jack realized that the time spent together had not only revealed the richness of Eleanor's world, but also offered him insight into her character, her values, and the subtle layers beneath her poised exterior. He felt a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and a cautious hope that perhaps, within the confines of this contractual marriage, there was room for understanding, respect, and even the beginnings of an unexpected bond. The housekeeper appeared quietly at the edge of the hallway with refreshments, and Jack accepted a glass of water, letting the cool liquid soothe his parched throat while Eleanor spoke of the upcoming social engagements and responsibilities that would fill their days. Each word, each gesture, reinforced the careful balance of power and observation, and Jack understood that navigating the coming days would require both attentiveness and discretion. As they concluded the private tour and returned to the main living area, the evening light fading to a soft glow, Jack felt a heightened awareness of the mansion, its history, and Eleanor herself, knowing that the experiences of this night were merely the beginning of a journey in which each interaction, no matter how small, could reveal truths about both of them and perhaps shift the delicate equilibrium of their unusual marriage. Jack Miller felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere as Eleanor Brooks led him into a smaller, more intimate study at the end of the gallery hallway. The room was lined with shelves containing personal mementos, photographs of family gatherings, and journals whose leather covers were worn with age. Eleanor gestured for Jack to sit in a comfortable armchair while she settled across from him, her posture relaxed yet undeniably commanding. She began to speak softly, her voice carrying a weight of experience and a hint of vulnerability that Jack had not expected. She explained that despite her wealth and independence, she had lived a life largely alone, and the arrangement they had entered was not just a financial necessity for him, but a means for her to feel a semblance of companionship in her later years. Jack listened intently, feeling a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and an emerging respect for the woman before him. Eleanor shared stories of her younger days, the challenges of managing her businesses, and the loneliness that had accompanied her successes, and Jack began to see layers of complexity beneath her composed exterior. He realized that every decision she had made, including the marriage contract, was guided by a combination of practicality, foresight, and a desire for human connection, however unconventional. As she spoke, Jack noticed a small sketchbook lying on the corner of the desk, filled with delicate drawings of places, objects, and people who had shaped Eleanor's life. He recognized it as more than an artistic expression. It was a visual diary that revealed thoughts and emotions she rarely voiced aloud. The moment created a sense of intimacy, a quiet acknowledgement that the walls they had built around themselves could be crossed through understanding and observation. Eleanor then leaned slightly forward and asked Jack about his own life, his struggles as a student, and the challenges he had faced supporting his family. Jack spoke candidly, describing the relentless pressure of unpaid tuition, late fees, and part-time jobs, the anxiety that had become a constant companion. He felt a strange relief in her listening, in her attentiveness, and realized that this was the first time in months that someone had truly heard his story without judgment or expectation. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, offering insights drawn from her own experiences, and Jack felt an unexpected kinship forming, a bridge spanning decades and social differences. The conversation shifted to more practical matters, the structure of the household, the expectations of staff, and the subtleties of living under the same roof while maintaining both privacy and civility. Eleanor's explanations were precise and thorough, but her tone carried a subtle encouragement, a recognition that Jack was navigating uncharted territory and that mistakes would be a natural part of the process. As the evening deepened, the sun setting and casting a soft amber glow across the study, Jack realized that the 7 days ahead would not only test his adaptability and composure, but also challenge his preconceptions about relationships, trust, and respect. Eleanor had opened a window into her world, sharing personal truths and inviting him to engage with her life on a level far beyond the contractual obligations. Jack felt the weight of this invitation, understanding that how he responded would shape not only the immediate dynamics of their marriage, but potentially the foundations of a deeper understanding between them. He left the study with a renewed sense of purpose, aware that the next steps required attentiveness, empathy, and a willingness to see Eleanor not only as a figure of authority and wealth, but as a complex individual whose past, present, and expectations would influence every interaction, and that within these interactions, opportunities for trust, connection, and unexpected friendship or respect could emerge. even within the unusual framework of their contractual marriage. The following morning, Jack Miller awoke with a lingering sense of unease, the grandeur of the mansion now feeling more like a maze than a home. The previous day's revelations and Eleanor Brooks' quiet insights had left him both curious and apprehensive, and he could not shake the thought that every step he took, every word he spoke, would be scrutinized. After dressing in the simple but well-tailored clothing Eleanor had provided, he descended the wide staircase to the main floor, noting how the morning light filtered through the tall windows and illuminated the intricate patterns in the marble. The mansion was already stirring with activity. Staff moved with silent precision, preparing breakfast and tidying rooms with a dedication that Jack found both impressive and intimidating. As he entered the dining room, he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension that seemed to ripple beneath the polished calm. Eleanor had returned from her morning engagements, her presence commanding attention without effort, and she moved with the confidence of someone fully accustomed to control and influence. Jack greeted her respectfully, and she nodded in acknowledgement, but her eyes carried a quiet intensity, as though she had sensed his internal struggle and wished to test the boundaries of his composure. Over breakfast, Jack attempted to focus on the food, the delicate balance of flavors and the artistry of the presentation, but his mind remained partially consumed by the implications of the day ahead. Eleanor observed him closely, her expression unreadable, and when the silence stretched, she asked about his plans for the morning and whether he intended to explore the mansion further or remain within the familiar rooms he had already traversed. Jack hesitated, considering whether to reveal his curiosity or maintain a cautious distance, and he chose honesty, explaining that he wished to understand the layout, the routines, and the nuances of living within such a meticulously maintained environment. Eleanor nodded, a subtle approval flickering in her eyes, and then casually mentioned that a guest might be visiting later in the day, someone who had known her family for years. Jack's stomach tightened slightly. The notion of outsiders entering this delicate ecosystem introduced a new variable, one that could test his composure, his adaptability, and perhaps even his sense of dignity. He understood immediately that the coming hours would require careful observation, a keen awareness of social cues, and the ability to navigate both the formal and unspoken rules of Eleanor's world. Mid-morning, a discreet knock at the door signaled the arrival of her assistant, a young woman with a professional demeanor and a clipboard full of notes, who quietly informed Jack that the visitor would arrive within the hour and that Eleanor wished for him to join the meeting in the drawing room. Jack took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and made his way toward the drawing room, mentally rehearsing his mannerisms, his tone of voice, and the respectful attentiveness he would need to demonstrate. The drawing room was a perfect blend of elegance and comfort, its furniture arranged to encourage conversation while still maintaining a sense of authority. Eleanor took her seat at one end of the room, Jack at the other, and the assistant excused herself, leaving the two of them in a charged silence that was broken only when the front door opened and the guest arrived. The visitor, an older gentleman with sharp eyes and a subtle but unmistakable air of expectation, greeted Eleanor warmly, and Jack felt a flicker of anxiety as he realized that this encounter would reveal his ability to maintain composure, engage appropriately, and navigate the intricate social dynamics of a world he had entered out of necessity. Throughout the conversation, Jack observed Eleanor closely, noting her subtle cues, the rhythm of her speech, and the gestures that conveyed authority without overt dominance. He responded when appropriate, measured and attentive, and began to sense that each interaction, each observation, and each decision within this encounter could influence not only his standing within the mansion, but also Eleanor's perception of his character, intelligence, and suitability as a partner in this contractual marriage. By the time the meeting concluded, Jack had gained insight into the delicate balance of power, respect, and discretion that would govern his daily life, and he left the drawing room with a heightened awareness that every choice he made, every expression he displayed, and every word he spoke would carry weight, shaping both the unfolding relationship and the perception of him as a man capable of navigating a world far removed from his own. Jack Miller found himself standing at the edge of the grand ballroom, a space he had only glimpsed from the mezzanine the previous day, now bustling with staff arranging tables, polishing silverware, and adjusting floral arrangements. Eleanor Brooks was already at the center of it all, commanding the attention of the senior staff with a few precise gestures, her voice calm, yet authoritative as she ensured that everything met her high standards. Jack took a deep breath, aware that tonight's gala would be his first test in a public setting where he would be seen as her husband, not merely a visitor in her world. As the doors opened to invited guests, the room filled with the soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle rustle of silk gowns and tailored suits, Jack felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. He followed Eleanor's lead, staying close yet slightly behind, absorbing her mannerisms, the graceful way she navigated the room, and the ease with which she engaged with the prominent figures of the city. When a small group approached, greeting Eleanor warmly, Jack was introduced in turn, and he felt a flash of self-consciousness as he shook hands with businessmen, philanthropists, and community leaders, aware that his youthful appearance and modest background contrasted sharply with the environment. Eleanor noticed his hesitation and gave him a subtle nod, a silent encouragement that helped him steady his composure. He responded to conversations with measured attentiveness, asking questions, expressing polite interest, and carefully observing the dynamics around him. As he moved through the crowd, he spotted an older acquaintance of Eleanor's, a woman whose sharp eyes seemed to study him more than the event itself. Jack felt a twinge of anxiety, knowing that his every word and gesture would be noted, yet he forced himself to maintain a confident, respectful demeanor. Eleanor guided him through the event, introducing him at the right moments and subtly redirecting conversations when needed, providing a framework in which he could interact without misstep. As the evening progressed, Jack began to relax slightly, finding moments of connection with guests who responded positively to his earnestness and curiosity. He noticed Eleanor's approving glances, brief and fleeting, but enough to remind him that she recognized his efforts. Midway through the gala, the band began playing softly, and Eleanor invited Jack to join her at the center for a ceremonial toast. He felt his stomach tighten, but he followed her confidently, raising his glass in unison. The applause that followed felt simultaneously overwhelming and affirming, and Jack realized that he had navigated the initial challenge successfully, that he had earned a measure of respect within Eleanor's world, even if the deeper complexities of their arrangement remained. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Eleanor and Jack remained in the quieted ballroom, the polished floors reflecting the fading candlelight, and she spoke to him privately, offering praise for his composure, acknowledging the effort it took for him to adapt, and hinting at further opportunities for him to engage with the mansion's affairs and the social circles that were an integral part of her life. Jack listened intently, grateful for her recognition and keenly aware that this evening had provided more than just a test. It had offered insight into Eleanor's values, her expectations, and the subtle ways in which she measured character, and he understood that each subsequent day would require the same blend of attentiveness, respect, and quiet confidence. As he continued to navigate the intricate balance between contractual obligation and the possibility of building a genuine connection. The morning after the gala, Jack Miller awoke to the quiet hum of the mansion, the sunlight spilling gently across the polished hardwood floors and casting long shadows from the towering drapes. He dressed quickly, mindful that today would bring new challenges and revelations. As he descended the grand staircase, the staff moved silently around him, their eyes occasionally flicking in his direction with a mix of curiosity and polite observation. Eleanor Brooks awaited him in the study, her presence as composed and commanding as ever, yet there was a subtle tension in her posture that Jack recognized immediately. She gestured for him to sit, and he complied, noting the small stack of documents and letters arranged neatly on her desk. Eleanor began speaking with a measured tone, revealing that she had recently discovered a matter concerning the management of one of her estates that required immediate attention. Jack listened carefully, aware that her calm exterior often masked the intensity of her scrutiny and the high stakes involved. As she explained, Jack noticed the subtle way Eleanor's eyes watched him, gauging his reactions to the complexity of the situation, and he realized that this was a deliberate test of his perceptiveness and judgment. He responded with careful questions and observations, drawing upon his own reasoning and insights, and Eleanor nodded occasionally, a small but significant acknowledgement of his engagement and capability. Midway through the discussion, Eleanor revealed that certain actions had been misrepresented by her staff to create confusion, and that she wanted Jack to help uncover the truth, not merely to follow instructions, but to demonstrate initiative and discernment. Jack felt a mixture of apprehension and intrigue. The task was far beyond anything he had encountered as a student, yet it was an opportunity to prove that he could operate effectively within her world. As he examined the documents and considered the potential discrepancies, Eleanor encouraged him to trust his instincts while adhering to the standards she expected, highlighting the delicate balance between autonomy and respect that would define his role in the mansion. The conversation gradually shifted to more personal matters, and Eleanor shared glimpses of her concerns about trust, legacy, and the people she had relied upon for years. Jack began to understand that the contractual marriage they shared was only a framework, and that the deeper dynamics would be shaped by observation, decision-making, and mutual recognition of competence and integrity. By late morning, Jack had gained clarity on the immediate situation and had formulated a plan to verify the facts while maintaining discretion and professionalism. Eleanor expressed approval in a subtle, understated way, and for the first time, Jack sensed that she saw him not only as a participant in the arrangement, but as someone capable of judgment, discernment, and contribution. As he prepared to carry out the next steps, Jack felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him, but alongside it came a cautious confidence. He realized that this episode was more than a test of his skill. It was a reveal of the deeper currents of Eleanor's expectations and an opportunity for him to navigate the complexities of their relationship with integrity, insight, and careful observation. The morning had unveiled not only the challenges of managing a portion of Eleanor's estate, but also the subtle indicators of trust, influence, and mutual respect that would govern the coming days, and Jack understood that how he approached these moments could shape the trajectory of both his role in the mansion and the evolving, tentative connection forming between him and Eleanor Brooks. Jack Miller stood in the quiet study of the mansion, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors and the walls lined with Eleanor Brooks' carefully curated collection of books and family photographs. After the morning spent managing the estate documents and navigating the subtle tests Eleanor had set before him, he felt both exhausted and invigorated, a strange combination that left him contemplative. Eleanor entered the room quietly, her presence as composed and commanding as always, yet there was a softness in her gaze that caught Jack off guard. She closed the door behind her, giving them both a sense of privacy, and gestured for him to sit in one of the high-backed chairs. Jack complied, aware that this conversation would be different from the structured interactions of earlier days, more personal, more revealing. Eleanor spoke first, acknowledging the effort Jack had made to understand the intricacies of the household, the staff, and the social expectations that accompanied her life. She admitted that she had been testing him, observing not only his actions but his thought processes, his judgments, and the way he handled responsibility under pressure. Jack listened intently, realizing that her approach was not simply about control or scrutiny, but about understanding whether he could be trusted, whether he could rise to the expectations she held for anyone close to her life. As she continued, Eleanor shared stories from her own youth, her experiences navigating complex social networks, and the lessons she had learned about trust, patience, and discernment. Jack found himself absorbing each word, noting the parallels between her challenges and his own struggles, even though the scale and context were vastly different. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the distant hum of the city below and the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Jack reflected on the unusual bond that was forming, one that went beyond the contractual obligations of their marriage. Eleanor's revelations had begun to humanize the formidable figure he had first encountered, revealing vulnerabilities, priorities, and values that he had not expected to see. With a deliberate tone, Eleanor posed a question to Jack about how he viewed their arrangement and whether he felt capable of not only fulfilling his duties, but also engaging with the life he had entered in a meaningful way. Jack took a deep breath and spoke honestly about his fears, his desire to adapt, and the respect he had begun to feel for her wisdom and judgment. Eleanor nodded, appreciating his candor, and offered insights into the importance of mutual understanding, communication, and the balance between personal autonomy and partnership, even within a marriage founded on necessity. They discussed the coming days, the expectations for public appearances, interactions with staff, and the subtle ways in which trust and respect could be demonstrated through thoughtful action and consideration. Eleanor encouraged Jack to observe closely, to learn from the environment, and to continue developing his own approach to navigating the mansion, noting that each interaction was an opportunity to grow and to build a foundation of mutual respect. As the conversation drew to a close, Jack felt a renewed sense of clarity and purpose, recognizing that the journey ahead was as much about understanding Eleanor as it was about understanding himself. The late afternoon light softened further, illuminating the study in warm hues, and Jack realized that the boundaries of their contractual relationship were beginning to blur, revealing the potential for connection, empathy, and trust that neither of them had anticipated, laying the groundwork for the evolution of their unusual marriage into something far more meaningful and human than either had initially imagined. Jack Miller stood in the grand gallery once more, the walls bathed in the warm golden light of the late afternoon, the shadows of the framed paintings stretching long across the polished hardwood floors. Today felt different. There was an energy in the air that seemed to hint at change, at the possibility of transformation beyond the rigid boundaries of the contractual marriage. He held a small sketchbook in his hands, one he had begun filling during his walks through the mansion, capturing impressions of rooms, the gardens, and the subtle expressions he observed in Eleanor Brooks. The sketchbook had become a personal outlet, a way to process the overwhelming experiences of the past days and to reflect on his own growth within a world so far removed from his own. Eleanor entered quietly, her steps measured, her presence commanding yet imbued with an unusual warmth. She paused as she noticed the sketchbook in his hands, and a faint smile crossed her lips, an acknowledgement that bridged the formal distance that had existed between them. Jack held the book open, offering her the chance to see his observations, and Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages with genuine interest. For the first time, Jack felt that she was seeing him not only as a husband by agreement, but as an individual with thoughts, creativity, and insight. The room was filled with a quiet tension, the kind that carries both anticipation and vulnerability, as Eleanor placed a small silver envelope on the table. Jack opened it to find a delicate letter inviting him to view a private exhibition in one of the mansion's lesser-known galleries, a space Eleanor had used to display personal collections and artworks of particular significance. She explained that she wished to share this with him to offer him a glimpse into her personal world, and that the gesture was a recognition of his attentiveness, his curiosity, and the care he had demonstrated in navigating both the mansion and their unconventional marriage. As they walked together toward the private gallery, Jack felt a mixture of nervous excitement and profound respect. The gallery was intimate, walls painted a soft cream, floors of polished oak reflecting the gentle light from overhead fixtures. Eleanor motioned for him to look at a particular piece, a painting that depicted a serene lakeside scene, and she spoke quietly about the inspiration behind it, the memories it invoked, and the importance of capturing moments of calm amidst a life filled with responsibility and expectation. Jack listened intently, absorbing every detail, and as he shared his own impressions, Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, encouraging him to continue and validating his perspective. The conversation evolved naturally, moving from art to personal reflection, and Jack realized that this experience was not only about observing Eleanor's tastes, but about understanding her values, her history, and the depth of her character. The sketchbook in his hands became a shared tool, a symbol of trust and openness, and each page strengthened a subtle connection that had begun to form between them. By the time they left the gallery, the sun had set, casting the mansion in a soft glow that highlighted the intricate architecture and the careful placement of every object within. Jack understood that today's interactions had marked a turning point, that the gestures, the shared reflections, and the attention to detail had created a moment of authentic connection, and he felt a quiet determination to continue building on this foundation, to navigate the coming days with attentiveness, respect, and a growing awareness that the boundaries of their contractual relationship were beginning to give way to trust, understanding, and the possibility of genuine emotional intimacy that neither of them had anticipated. Jack Miller stood on the balcony overlooking the mansion's gardens, the night air cool against his face, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. The events of the past days had left him exhausted, but profoundly aware of the journey he had undertaken, navigating a world that had once seemed impossibly distant from his own. Eleanor Brooks emerged from the study behind him, her presence quiet yet commanding, and she stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the garden lanterns. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence filled with unspoken understanding and the shared experiences that had begun to weave a subtle bond between them. Jack turned toward Eleanor, his heart steady despite the nervous energy he had carried for days, and spoke honestly about what he had learned, how he had grown, and how the challenges of the mansion, the staff, and the unexpected responsibilities had reshaped his perspective. Eleanor listened, her gaze unwavering, and then she shared her own reflections, revealing that she had watched him adapt, observe, and respond with integrity, intelligence, and humility, qualities she had not expected to find a young man thrust into her world. The weight of formality between them seemed to dissolve slightly, replaced by mutual respect and recognition, and Jack felt a sense of clarity he had not anticipated, a certainty that went beyond the contractual terms of their marriage. Eleanor then reached into her desk and retrieved a small, elegant box containing a delicate ring, one she had set aside as a symbol not of obligation, but of acknowledgement, trust, and the potential for genuine connection. She extended it toward Jack, her voice calm, yet filled with a subtle warmth, inviting him to accept the gesture not as a requirement, but as a choice. Jack took the box carefully, the gesture carrying the culmination of days of observation, adaptation, and shared moments that had quietly built a bridge between them. He slid the ring onto his finger and looked into Eleanor's eyes, seeing there a mixture of approval, encouragement, and the faintest hint of affection that suggested the beginnings of something authentic and enduring. The mansion around them seemed to fade slightly into the background as they stood together on the balcony, the lights of the city glimmering below, and Jack realized that this moment marked a turning point, the point at which their unusual arrangement had transformed into a relationship grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and a shared acknowledgement of each other's character. Eleanor spoke softly, affirming that the past days had tested not only his capabilities, but also the depth of his honesty, patience, and adaptability, and Jack acknowledged that he had learned more than he had anticipated about resilience, responsibility, and the importance of integrity. Together, they looked out over the gardens, a sense of calm settling between them. The mansion no longer a space of tension and obligation, but a shared environment in which both could coexist, contribute, and connect. The journey that had begun as a contractual necessity had grown into something richer, a partnership forged through experience, observation, and the choices they had both made to respect and understand one another. And as they descended the balcony steps back into the mansion, Jack felt a quiet certainty that their lives, though unconventional, were now intertwined in a way that promised stability, companionship, and the possibility of genuine affection that had once seemed improbable. The night air carried a sense of completion, the challenges of the week giving way to clarity and resolution. And Jack knew that the foundation of trust and connection they had built would guide the days to come, marking the clear, satisfying conclusion to the initial chapter of their shared life.